The little Raine was tucked into her bed after her mother finished reading her a bedtime story. Her curly ink-black hair scattered all over the white pillow as her cherry lips formed a cute yawn and her eyes fluttered in an attempt to fight the drowsiness. She still wanted to hear her mother's voice, but her sleepiness got the best of her. Raine Tatum was an adorable 8-year-old girl who will turn 9 the day after tomorrow. She was so excited for her birthday party that had been arranged by her mother and father. "Good night, Raine." Her mother kissed her forehead before she stood up and turned off the light while walking out of the bedroom. "Good night, Mommy," Raine said, cuddling her teddy bear. The next second, the little girl fell into a deep sleep. The night was silent, too silent. The unusual thick darkness felt like heavy mist which surrounded Raine. She had woken up when she felt a cold hand touch her legs. She tried to brush it away and went back to sleep, thinking it was only a dream. However, the grab tightened. Only after that, Raine's eyes flew open. She looked down at her leg, and eyes as red as blood greeted her. In an instant, a chill started to creep on her body. That thing with red eyes was crawling on top of her. The place where a mouth was supposed to be there was replaced by a hollow with sharp teeth around it. Its cold hands were moving from her legs toward her neck with intention to strangle her. That thing's hot breath fanned Raine's face, leaving the poor little girl petrified. In her shock, she couldn't even breathe, let alone screamed, asking for help. Her body was shaking uncontrollable. The air was sucked from her lungs, leaving her breathless. She didn't know what would happen, but the pain because of lack of air made her uncomfortable. Her body convulsed, starting to give reaction. Raine tried to kick the creepy thing that strangled her in a futile attempt. When she felt her vision turn blurry and darkness was about to pull her in, the door slammed open along with a high-pitched, gruffy voice of a man. "Stop!" he yelled. The red eyes jerked away and released her. Raine took the opportunity to breathe air greedily as her body collapsed to the floor with pain. "Mommy," she managed to call her mother weakly. "Mommy?" She called her again between her sobbing, however her small voice no louder than a whisper. Raine raised her head slowly to look at the man who was standing on the doorstep of her bedroom. He was wearing a black sweater and ripped jeans. His long black hair was tied on his nape, and his smile was so vicious, showing his elongated canines from his gums. Raine gasped loudly before broke into a fit of cry. "Shut up!" he snarled. Raine was afraid, and her cry became louder, calling for her mother. "Mommy, shut up!" he roared. His right hand smashed the top of Raine's drawer, and it shattered into pieces. The little girl sucked in cold breath and crawled backward with her 4 limbs under her bed. She stayed there while cowering in fear. "Shift!" he ordered the red eyes to transform back. With a grunt, that thing's body shook strangely as its long and cold fingers shrunk into a normal human size. The hollow on his face replaced by lips that curled into a smirked, and his body turned into a human, shirtless. The only thing that remained was his red eyes. "Why did you stop me?" he asked. That man intentionally sat on the top of the bed that made it dip down by his weight, and Raine, who was crouching down under it, flinched and made a short shriek. She is the girl that Lucifer had been looking for this past century. "How do you know it is her?" The man on the doorstep was narrowing his eyes dangerously at the red eyes man, who shrugged his shoulder as he spoke. "She is able to see me when I shifted." For the fact that any other ordinary humans wouldn't have been able to see Shapeshifter in their other form. Thus Raine didn't supposed to be able to see him before, but she did. The little girl saw him clearly. The other man's eyes gleamed as he stroked his chin. "We will bring her to Beelzebub alive." When he finished speaking, the eerie chuckle filled the room from the red eyes man. The bed was shaking with the vibration of his voice, and Raine whimpered. "Didn't you hear me, dead man? I said, I will bring her dead body to Lucifer." His hands started to shift back with threatening claws in the end of his fingers. "Lowly shapeshifter," he muttered with mocking tone. "I found her first, and I will get my bounty from Beelzebub." He had fully shifted when he roared, "In that case, I will make you taste a second death." And he lurched forward, his nimble body onto the other man. Both of them fought with each other. The sound of bones cracking and the roar were deafening. Raine pressed her knees onto her chest, wrapped her small arms around them, and buried her face on it. Her body shivered violently, and the anguish screamed from the red eyes. Man didn't help her to feel better. Finally, after the long growled and cursed, came silent. Raine scurried away when the man who was standing on the doorstep before hoisted her bed with one hand like it was weight nothing. "Come here, you little brat," he said while panting. "Beelzebub has to pay me handsomely for this." He spitted to the lifeless body on the floor. The red eyes man dead with his blood pooled under him. The man's black sweater had torn into shreds while his long black hair fluttered behind him. Raine whimpered when his bloody hand grabbed the back of her pajamas and whisked her out of the room. He dragged the little girl away along the hallway of her bedroom. She screamed once again on the top of her lung, calling her mother and father. But there was no response from them. Impossible. The scary man just passed her parent bedroom. They should be heard her screaming, no matter how deep they had slept. She cried and tried to get away from the man's tight grip. She stabbed her nails onto his hand, but his skin was like a marble. She tried to hit his leg, but he even didn't seem aware of her effort. Lastly, she bit his hand, which grabbing her pajamas. The man stopped walking as he raised Raine on his left hand. Her attempt to run away annoyed him. With a low growl, he shoved Raine toward the display cabinet made of glass, where her father put his miniature towers from the places that he had visited. The glass was shattering the moment her body collided with the display cabinet, and in no time the tiny shards pierced her skin in certain places on Raine's body that caused the little girl wailed in pain. The broken glasses scattered all over the floor. FreeWebNovel.com. "Mommy, Daddy," she cried when the fragment cut her feet the moment she tried to stand up. But her fear for the man in front of her turned her numb as she backed away from him and ran toward the open door in the living room. As Raine dashed toward the entrance direction, she caught a glimpse of two dead bodies laid on the floor. Blood was oozing out from their open wound. She knew them. "Mommy, Daddy!" she cried in horror. The scene, too, terrified for her. Raine slumped on the ground as a loud, ear-shattering scream escaped from her lips. She was shivering and shaking uncontrollably. Covering her eyes with her hands, she felt that man approached her again and yanked her from the floor. Raine screamed when she felt her body flew in the air and crashed the wall. The pain was simply unbearable. However, it wasn't only her who cried in pain, but that man also let out a high-pitched shouted and cursed. Raine lowered her hand from her face and slowly raised her head to see what was happening to the man that caused him to scream in anguish. That man was holding his right hand as the bulging vein was visible to see. It showed how much pain that he needed to endure at that time. Seeing the opportunity to escape, the little girl dragged her aching body toward the door, which connected to the front yard of their house. She would go to Uncle James, who lived the next door, and asked for help. With that thought in mind, Raine forced herself to ignore the aching pain from her feet that had bled when she moved as fast as her feet could go. Faster, faster. Raine said to herself when she ran past the doorstep and landed her bare feet on the grass. The dew on the grass made the pain worse, as though she was running on top of 1,000 needles, yet she didn't dare to stop and whined. When she had ran halfway through the yard and almost reached their main gate, something hit her back very hard. She yelped and arched her back in pain. Her breath hitched when his sharp and long nail dug the skin on her shoulder. "Stop, or I will kill you!" he yelled on top of Raine's face. However, his threat didn't stop the little girl to fight him. She kept struggling to free herself until her bleeding hand touched his upper arms. The scary man screamed in pain once again and loosened his grip on her shoulder. The understanding dawned on her as she looked back and forth from her bleeding hand to the anguish expression of the man above her. Apparently, her blood was the source of his pain. Without thinking twice, Raine put her bleeding hand to his bare chest, and the moment their skin made contact, he shrieked in anguish. "Bitch!" Before he could hit her, Raine wriggled her body and escaped from him. She stood up quickly, yanked open the gate, and rushed to the direction of Uncle James's yard. The scary man didn't follow her, and Raine didn't have a gut to find out why. She ran across the empty street to the white house next her house. Fortunately, Uncle James never locked his gate, otherwise Raine wouldn't be able to enter his house. The moment she reached his terrace, she opened her mouth to call out for him. But there was no voice that could be heard. She tried a couple of times with no avail. Frustrated, she pounded her small fist against the wooden door and kicked it hard. Pounding and hitting, again and again until the commotion that she made woken up the people inside the room. The door swung open with a harsh tone from Uncle James. "What the hell is that?" Raine slumped on the ground when the open door revealed Uncle James in his boxer with a baseball bat on his right hand. "Raine?" James looked down at his friend's daughter. "What happened to you?" He crouched down to scoop her in his arms while his eyes wandered around his yard to look for any possibility of threat. But none. There was nothing there, except darkness. "Honey, what happened?" He stroked her back, trying to calm her. "Tell me what happened." Bad feeling crept in when James saw blood on the little girl body and Raine kept pointing out toward her house. James looked at the house across the street with narrowed eyes. "Anne, bring her inside and call the police." He instructed his wife, who was crouching down beside him. James passed Raine to Anne, and he stood up to approach his friend's house with baseball bat on his grip. "Be careful," she warned him worriedly and brought Raine into the house before she called police station. 3 hours later, Raine's house had surrounded by many people who was curious to know what had happened to Tatum's family. Police line could be seen, restrained the onlookers to step closer at a crime scene. Sirens from the ambulance car were so loud and deafening as the silent night turned to be a chaos. He was the sovereign in human world for their kind, while Jedrek Donovan, his brother, ruled the supernatural world alongside with Kace. However, Kace had gone missing for almost 100 years by now. No one knew where he was. Inside James' house, Raine buried her face on Anne's embrace. In front of her, there were 2 police officers who were trying to get information from her. "We will come back tomorrow." One of the police officers sighed deeply after failed to retrieve information from the little girl. "My condolences, little Raine." The older police officers walked toward her and stroked her head with sympathy. "We will find the perpetrator." Afterward, both of them were looking for James again to ask another detail, for the fact he was the first person who had approached the house before the police came. Probably he had missed something that could lead their investigation to the murderer. The criminal scene was devastated, if one could say, especially inside Raine's bedroom, as though a bunch of actors from WWF had performed there. Except from that, there was nothing. Remembering the scene, not even a single drop of blood was there. Moreover, there wasn't a single fingerprint in there. That was nearly impossible. Not a single fingerprint could be found in the entire house. James had repeated his statement that he also didn't see a single person when he approached the house. It was strange. The only person who knew the truth was only Raine Tatum, the only daughter of Tatum's family. But she wasn't in a good state for interrogation. "I didn't see anyone when I came," James repeated. 8 years later. Did I make myself clear? Torak's deep voice boomed inside the room that consisting of 6 people of his board of directors. While his gaze swept throughout the room, all of them didn't dare to look at him in the eyes as they hummed in tone of agreement. "All of you can leave, except Mr. Ronan." Torak's ocean blue eyes fell on the middle-aged man who was sitting on his right side. "Yes, sir." All of them answered in unison and hurriedly collecting their scatter papers on the table as though the next second they stay, their CEO would make their life more miserable than this. Everyone except Ronan left the room. The 5 of them were throwing their sympathy look on him. Their common guest was Ronan, as one of the shareholder had done something that unacceptable that caused Torak Donovan needed to talk to him face to face. Since the beginning of the meeting, they had felt Torak wasn't in his right mood. He looked more cold and sharp than before. It didn't mean that usually he was cordial and warm with other people, but something must be gone very wrong if they could notice the irritated in his demeanor during the meeting. However, the thing that they didn't know about their discussion was beyond their imagination. After everyone left, a young man in his late 20s came inside the room, and Ronan stood up from his seat, bent his body slightly in respect. "Beta Supreme Raphael." He greeted Raphael, Torak's assistant. Raphael nodded his head in acknowledgement as he sauntered across the room and put a stack of document on the table in front of Torak. Alpha Supreme Torak, you need to take a look at this. Raphael pushed an important document that needed Torak's attention the most. Torak Donovan, the legendary name from Donovan's sibling, who was famous in both human world and supernatural world. He was the famous CEO from Donovan Enterprises Holding Inc. in human world. Not every soul were fortunate enough to see him. He ran the company behind the scene and only held an important meeting with important person, while the rest would be handled by his beta or gamma. Not all of his staff was human. Most of them were supernatural creatures, like Ronin. He was initially an alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack, the pack that located in one of Torak's businesses. Automatically, most of the member of the pack would work for him under his company.